Ready? Ready? All right. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the special work session of the Ann Arbor City Council, May 17, with respect to police chief candidate interviews. Kicking off today, Kim Bennett.
Thank you, council members, for participating in the panel interviews for the police chief position. This morning you were given 3 packets. One is 1 packet per candidate, which is a list of questions that were put together to evaluate each candidate. At the conclusion of that interview, you have an evaluation form that you will use to rate the candidate and provide comments or feedback on how you felt that the candidate did. And then on the back of the evaluation form, there are 3 questions, open-ended questions in regards to the candidate and if they would be a fit as a police chief, and what you think their greatest strength would be, and what their area of improvement would need to be if they came to Ann Arbor to be the next police chief. Thank you.
Thank you. So we'll be spending a couple of minutes with each of our police chief candidates. First up, Mr. Forsberg.
Good morning.
Good morning. Welcome. So as you've probably been briefed, I'll be running through a couple of questions. If you could answer those, there may be follow-up along the way. I think we'll try to deal with question by question. If there's follow-up, we'll hit that. But I will pay fairly close attention to the clock for us all to make sure that we get to all 6, which will interrupt our natural flow, but which will promote, I hope, fairness among the various candidates.
Sounds good.
Sound good? All right.
Yeah.
So our first question today, please walk us through your law enforcement career to date.
Sure. So in the interest of time, I'll just kind of briefly go through it, but I think I'd like to start sort of at the beginning. I graduated college in '96 and sort of knew I wanted to get into law enforcement, but didn't really have a great idea what that meant. I thought maybe I wanted to be in the FBI. I thought maybe I wanted to explore sort of state police stuff. Members of my family are involved in law enforcement. They told me that I needed to kind of get a reality check and figure out what law enforcement's all about, and suggested that I look for some local jobs. So I got a job working for the University of Michigan as a security officer with the plan of using that as a stepping stone into some other career. I fell in love with U of M, fell in love with the city of Ann Arbor, and didn't leave. The University of Michigan sponsored me to attend the police academy. I went to the Washtenaw Police Academy, where I incidentally went with a couple of sponsored Ann Arbor police officers at the time. So I spent the next 20 years working for the University of Michigan Police Department, where I held the position of police officer, detective, sergeant, detective sergeant, lieutenant, captain, and was eventually promoted to deputy chief and transferred to the University of Michigan in Dearborn. So I sort of along the way, I had a couple of educational milestones that I just would want to highlight for you. So I attended Northwestern University's School of Police Staff and Command. I attended the FBI National Academy Executive Management School. And it was while working at the University of Michigan in Dearborn that I realized what I sort of already knew, which is that I really loved working in Ann Arbor. So for the 20 years that I was working for the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, I worked very closely with a lot of the city officers. I worked, I got to know a lot of the community, not nearly as much as I have in the last year and a half. But while in Dearborn, I realized how much I missed Ann Arbor. So as soon as the deputy chief position was open for Ann Arbor Police, I applied and was lucky enough to be selected for the position I'm in now. So for the last year and a half, I've worked for the Ann Arbor Police Department as a deputy chief. Jim Baird hired me, and he announced his retirement and retired about 4 months after I got the job. Which I think selfishly was a great learning experience for me. It meant that Chief Faunus was elevated to the acting chief. He was the other deputy chief at the time. And it gave me an opportunity to, the way the structure works at our department is there are 2 deputy chiefs. One runs operations and the other runs administration. I was hired to do sort of the administrative stuff, but it just gave me an opportunity to get to know all of patrol and all the inner operational workings of the department. So it was a great learning experience for me to see how all aspects of the Ann Arbor Police Department run. I also had a great opportunity to work with the task force that formed the Oversight Commission. That was one of my primary, I would say, after-hours endeavors for all of last summer. So that gave me great exposure to sort of law enforcement and what it means to provide service to this community. So, while at U of M, I had a bunch of different jobs, and I could probably talk about it for all of our 45 minutes, but I ran the Detective Bureau, I ran patrol operations. While a sergeant, I was in charge of major events on campus, so I was responsible for coordinating security and working with all the local area law enforcement agencies and federal agencies to kind of coordinate safety for those game days. I worked very closely with Ann Arbor Police at that time. I also was in charge of the community policing unit while a sergeant, so I was in charge of sort of revamping the University of Michigan's community policing program. I had some great officers that worked for me. We were able to kind of grow that program over the years that I was a sergeant.
All right, excellent. Are there any quick follow-ups? Councilmember Eaton.
Thank you. Welcome, and
Thank you.
for applying. Can you contrast the kind of policing you did for the University of Michigan with what our own department does? I mean, what are the areas of similarity and contrast?
Sure, so I would start with maybe the similarities. Policing on a college campus like the University of Michigan, there are people that live there. And so the size of the school, the volume of the students and faculty and staff is such that it is a full-service law enforcement agency. So we did everything there that the Ann Arbor Police do here, that all municipalities do. We have our own criminal investigations, Detective Bureau, the same kinds of units. We partner very closely with the City of Ann Arbor Police Department for a number of reasons, one of which is, as you all know, the University of Michigan it's not just, there's not a wall around it. It's interspersed throughout our community. And so we had to work very closely and collaboratively with the Ann Arbor Police. One of the differences would be that the vast majority of the population that we would deal with at the University of Michigan would turn over every few years. So, we were, I would say, able to kind of hone our skills of teaching the community how to do things in a safe manner. We would have to regularly re-educate the community on how to live safely in that community. That's not to say we don't do that with the Ann Arbor Police Department. It's just we're doing it. We don't have to do it quite as often because nobody wants to leave Ann Arbor. So it's a little differences, but not that much. It's the same prosecutor's office. It's the same partnership with the Michigan State Police. It's the same FBI office. So in many ways, they're very, very similar. The Ann Arbor Police Department is about twice the size of the University of Michigan Police Department. So structures are a little bit different. Responsibilities are a little bit different. So as a lieutenant at the University of Michigan, I was in charge of all of patrol, whereas patrol here we have two lieutenants just because of the volume of staff. There's a night and a day shift lieutenant.
I'm going to move to the next question. If there are council members with follow-ons. We have 6 questions. If you can hold it to the end, hopefully we'll get to it. Our next formal question is, why do you want to work for the Ann Arbor Police Department?
Well, I already work for the Ann Arbor Police Department, and I've spent the last year and a half kind of reacclimating to being in Ann Arbor, realizing how much I love it here. The last year and a half, I've gotten to know the officers and the supervisors and the non-sworn staff at the department. I've gotten to know some of you on council, and I feel like it was the right decision for me a year and a half ago. I really love working for the city. I really love being a member of the community and getting to know, one of the differences between U of M and the city of Ann Arbor is there are different stakeholders, and so I've really enjoyed getting to know as many of the stakeholders as I possibly could in the last year and a half. I want to be chief. I'm the only internal permanent deputy chief in the process right now. I feel like I have the skills to do the job. I feel like I have the experience to do the job. There are great lieutenants at the department that can help me do the job, so I don't mean to sound like it's just me doing this job. There's a great support staff, not only within the department, but within the city, that I think I'm the right person for the job.
Are there follow-ons to that? Question number 3. In your opinion, what are some of the most significant challenges police officers face? And what is the best way to meet those challenges?
Well, I think one of the most significant challenges the police officers face is earning the trust of the community. I think that at times there's a lack of trust within the community for the motivation behind what the police officers are doing. I think we believe that our motivations are in the right place. But I think there are ways that we can kind of bridge the gap between how we are and how we would like to be seen. I think the Policing Commission is a great opportunity to begin bridging that gap. And we really only do build trust by having transparency, having accountability within our ranks. But we do a lot of great work right now that I feel like people just don't know about, or maybe they just don't understand how we hold ourselves accountable. So educating the community through that transparency would be, I think, the #1 way to go about that.
Follow-ups? Sorry, Councilman Nelson.
Hi. So you mentioned that transparency is one of the methods of building trust, and I noticed in some of your the materials we were given from you plan to publish important policies on the AAPD website, and I was just curious if you could talk more about that, about what policies you think would be important to be publicized to the community, or any examples of what you think would be helpful to be transparent about.
Sure. I think it's not just policies, but it's data transparency. And I have my idea of what policies the community may want to know about, but it's important to work with the community to figure out what policies they would like to hear about. So whether it's use of force policies, pursuit policies, trespass policies, those policies that I would say impact and have the most crossover into the community that we think of as our higher risk ones, those would be ones that I would want to work towards sharing with the community. So there are certain parts of the policy that perhaps procedurally we may not want to share. We may want to redact some of it, but the philosophy behind the policies, and I think that would be important to share broadly with the community. Now, one of the best things about the Policing Commission is that I think we can have a relationship with that group where we can share things unredacted with them so that they can sort of be a conduit into some of the more nuanced parts of the policy where they can give us feedback, and with the trust they have with the community, they would be able to convince the community that maybe some of the stuff that's perhaps redacted, that there's a reason for that redaction. So it may be national security policy type things and how we act. It might be specifics on certain types of force and use of force. But yeah, and I would also want to work with, obviously there's a legal team within the city, so we would want to make sure that we were talking to a bunch of people before we just shared everything. You're welcome.
Further follow-on?
So I could just add to that. I mentioned data as well. So I think that there's a lot of data that we have that there's an appetite in the community and on council to have. So it's not just a policy, but there's a lot of data that we could share with the public to help build that transparency and trust. We're starting to do that now with Avalon Housing and some other units that want to know when we're responding to their addresses.
Mr. Mayor.
Please, Councilman Breton.
So follow up on that. In your experience, is there a policy or something that we withheld that you think that we shouldn't have?
I don't know that that's happened. I know that we have been asked for policies from the Human Rights Commission, for example, and I think we've worked within the systems at the city to get them the policies that they want. I know it's probably not as quick as they would like.
Councilman Ramlali.
Thank you. This might be a long, and again, thank you for showing up this morning and giving us your time and service to our community. You said the lack of trust, and it keeps coming up. And all the conversations I've been a part of I'm just wondering, in your opinion, why you believe the trust isn't there. Has it ever been there? Are we at a high, low mark? Can you put it in a historical context and maybe explain to us why there's a lack of trust, and that is the biggest challenge?
Sure. I think this is just my opinion. I think in law enforcement in general, and at this department, we provide great service to the community when it in regards to investigation of criminal complaints, in traffic enforcement. But in the last decade, we've had to get away from some of our more community engagement focused philosophies, just by virtue of the number of staff that we have and their assignments. And so I think one of the great things about community engagement is that you're able to have positive interactions with the community, and that there's benefit to that, not only for the community to see that the police officers are not always there to arrest people or see victims on the worst day of the year for them, but we've gotten away from the ability to have the volume of positive interactions with the community that I think we need to have. And so then when there are national events where the police are acting inappropriately, or there are events within the city where things happen and people are hurt, we don't have sort of that well of positive interactions to draw on to have that trust that's already there. And so I think a commitment to community engagement department-wide, and it's not to say that we have not had that commitment, it's just, it's at an officer level. We have a small community engagement unit. So I think from the top down, there needs to be a very strong commitment to getting out into the community and having positive interactions with people.
Councilor Lum.
Thanks. This question about the challenges police officers face, and if I could look for maybe perhaps more specific examples. So I'll frame this as sort of a role play kind of question and ask you if you could share what was the most difficult situation you've encountered where there was community pushback or opposition to what you were attempting to do and how you dealt with it.
Community pushback to what I was trying to do?
Or opposition to something, so you were challenged, and how you dealt with it. Hold off on that?
Yes, that gets fairly close to question 6.
Okay, I'll hold off on that.
You're-
Keep that,
You got it.
sorry, I didn't,
Well, no worries.
If only we had the questions in advance.
So let's roll with question 4, because that's the only way to get to question 6.
You got it.
Never a worry. Tell us about a time when you had to problem solve with city council or a corollary group. What role did you play, and what was the outcome? So problem solve with city council, what role did you play, and what was the outcome?
Sure. So I'll use an Ann Arbor example, and it's probably up for you all to vote on our budget soon, so I don't want to let the cat out of the bag too much. But so the leadership of Ann Arbor Police Department identified recruiting as a massive need for our department, and what we noticed, and diversity of recruiting. So what we noticed is that when we go and recruit at the police academies for new police officers, there's a lack of diversity of people that are graduating from police academies. So I don't quote me on the exact numbers, but it's 95 to 100% of the people graduating from police academies are young white men. And so we wanted to figure out a way as a team to be able to have a more diverse applicant pool for the police officer positions. And so what we ended up doing was sort of discussing internally and looking at what other departments have done nationally, and then look back historically what has Ann Arbor done for recruiting. And we spoke to our police officers union about any ideas they have. So this is sort of maybe a story about giving voice to the creative ideas within the department and letting people go out and research stuff. And we were able to come up with a plan for having a police service specialist cadet position, which we've been approved for and that hopefully you all will be voting on soon. And this is a position where we can recruit people to come work our police desk downstairs across in our building, free up a police officer who would be working there. They can get out on the road, but this would be a non-sworn staff working the desk, answering the phone, and we can evaluate how they are for up to a year and then sponsor them and send them to a police academy. So in the process of figuring out what the barriers were to having a better diverse applicant pool, we kind of discovered what a lot of people already know, is that a police academy is a 40 to 50 hour a week commitment for up to 16 weeks. And so the people that are attending the police academies are folks that are taking out student loans, don't have to have a second job, or they may have to have a second job while they're attending the academy and paying their own tuition. So when we can sponsor someone in the academy, they're on our payroll, the city's payroll, so they're receiving a salary, and we are paying for their academy. So we're reducing the barriers to different groups to be able to attend the academy. And we're also accomplishing a way of getting a police officer out on the road by having that PSS cadet position. So what we try to do is formulate all of the different arguments and barriers you all may have in order to be able to approve that and anticipate what your questions might be, so that we can have everybody agree that this is a good solution to some of the problems we've identified within our department.
Thank you. Is there follow-up? Thank you. Question number 5. This relates to innovation. Creative people seem to offer new insights frequently. Please give us an example of when one of your insights or innovations was particularly well received by others.
Sure, I love that question. When I was a captain at the University of Michigan, one of my main functions was to work on a data-driven approach to policing. And so I had a kind of a like-minded IT director over there he had some great ideas, and I had some great ideas. We sort of partnered together to figure out if there was a way to establish a proactive patrol model for the police officers there, so we use sort of Amazon algorithms. So I don't know how many of you have Amazon Prime, but when you log in, based on your previous search histories, it has recommended things for you to buy. So this IT guy had the great idea of using that. So we uploaded all of our computer-aided dispatching data into an Amazon algorithm. So I'm not the IT guy. He was figuring out how this all worked. And what it would do is it would predict, so this algorithm would predict, based on call history, the most likely location at a specific given time that a call for service would be occurring. So we kind of had two paths that we could go down of. Either this was a passive thing where it would have a threshold of red lights blinking saying this is a likely time that somebody will need assistance in this area, or we could have it be more of an active thing of an officer with a cell phone or a tablet saying, I have some discretionary time right now, where should I go? Push a button and it'll say, given the time right now, this is the most likely location that somebody will need help. So it could be something like someone's lost their, the data that's going in is somebody may have lost their keys, maybe somebody had something stolen, or there had been an armed robbery, but it wasn't telling you exactly what you were looking for. I met with police officers to kind of ask them and do like a little bit of a survey and a focus group of how would you use something like this and how would this best help you to do your jobs better. I asked for volunteers and had about 6 officers that were really excited about this idea. And what we did was we used a bunch of department confiscated cell phones that were just sitting in our property, loaded in the apps, and gave it to the officers, and they went out on the road. And anytime they preferred to do it with when they had their own discretionary time, and we figured that was the best pilot for this program. They would push a button and they would go to wherever the app suggested that there were calls for service. And what we were finding was that there were sometimes people, it was fairly accurate in predicting that something could be happening in that area. What we never really established was, is it because the police officer was there that they were able to find something? But it was a very innovative way of doing things, I thought, and it was a very affordable way of doing it, because now nationally this is sort of the trend in law enforcement to have predictive policing and to use your data to predict where you should go.
Councilmember Grant.
Thank you. That's
Yeah.
fascinating. How did you think about equity? Like you said, was it because you were there, or was it, and there's that fine line between, technology's cool and do we want to be targeting certain populations?
No, absolutely. So
Yeah.
they no longer use that program. We sort of decided after 6 months of the pilot that we were thinking about the over-policing of certain areas. And so what we recognized was the data that was going into feeding this system was what was kind of predicting the outcome. So we're kind of saying, you know, garbage in, garbage out a little bit. And so we started taking that into consideration, and that was sort of the decision point of, after the 6-month evaluation, we thought it was very cool technology, but the application of it, we weren't quite sure that it was appropriate for that very reason. It's true now, if you send police officers into a neighborhood looking for traffic, they're going to find traffic violations wherever they go. So.
Further questions?
Juncture, but you just said send, just following up on the statement you just made about sending officers out into a neighborhood and policing of the kinds of areas. So just to, obviously now that you're with the Ann Arbor Police Department, the community, we know what the community policing area encompasses. I'm wondering, though, if you could just help frame better the understanding of the university's expanse of community policing. What is specifically that community that you police? I mean, you did say students, staff, faculty. Just to clarify, the job of the, and you had various roles at various, ranks, and were you, in your community-oriented policing experience at the University of Michigan, doing the similar kinds of community policing that the Ann Arbor Police Department does?
Oh, I mean, the quick answer is yes. It's different stakeholders and different, so there is a lot of overlap. So the students that live in the dorms on campus, so while I was a U of M police officer, my jurisdiction was anywhere that the university owned, leased, or rented property. And as an Ann Arbor police employee, it's the city of Ann Arbor. So most of the University of Michigan is contained within my current community. So while at U of M, we would go out and meet with the different community members that made up the University of Michigan. So it was students, and it continues to be students now. There are partnerships between the Ann Arbor Police community engagement and the U of M community engagement, especially where there's crossover in areas of fraternities, sororities, alcohol harm. So there are a lot of partnerships that are in place specifically in community policing for educational purposes of educating the university community that live in the city.
Okay, thanks for that clarification.
Councilor Ackerman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Mr. Forsberg, for being here. I think at a national and local level, the societal effects of mental health and substance abuse are really becoming clear. What are some creative ways that your experience may inform how police can offer solutions and partnership in that?
Yeah, so I think we're already starting to do that, and we were doing that at the department prior to my arrival. But I'm passionate about that, and I think that there's a really, it's sort of a low-hanging fruit for us as a department and as a profession to do a better job around policing and mental health. So we have an ongoing partnership that's been developed within the last year with Avalon Housing and Community Mental Health. To start with, we've trained, or we are training all of our staff in response to critical incidents and managing mental health. And that is put on by Community Mental Health and our staff that have been trained in providing that training. And we now have bi-weekly meetings with those groups, so Community Mental Health, Avalon Housing, and Ann Arbor Housing, to discuss problems that we're all seeing. So what we were noticing was that each of those groups would be identifying either problem addresses or frequent issues with the same individuals, but we may not all know about it. And the idea really started from, the police not being the appropriate solution to a mental health problem, but we're getting called out multiple times, and if we're going to the same address or the same community member that's having mental health crisis 12 to 15 times, what can we do, and we're perhaps using force or making an arrest and criminalizing what is actually a medical issue. If we can get the appropriate help on call number 1 or 2, we can divert that criminal issue at call number 15. So what we're doing in these biweekly meetings is discussing to make sure that all of the kind of the stakeholders there are aware of what we're all doing. We are sharing data with each of those groups on when we're going out to places so that they're aware, so especially Avalon Housing, if we're showing up to their residents, multiple times, they may have some non-criminal, some civil things and some resources that they can reach out to their residents to get them the help that they need. So what we're seeing is we're also bringing in, so our community engagement is involved in this process. We're bringing in our patrol lieutenants to have sort of visibility in these meetings so that they're aware of all of the resources that are available to our police officers. We're trying to have ride-alongs with community mental health, critical incident teams, critical response teams, and they're having ride-alongs with us so that we're aware that we're each a resource to each other. And we're making sure, so that the purpose of having lieutenants at these meetings, that they can kind of share that information down the chain of command. And the officers are now more likely to use community mental health early on in that process so that we can get the appropriate medical attention to the people rather than have things escalate after multiple calls for service to an address.
Further follow-up?
And I think this is just sort of the beginning of that. I think this is going to evolve into better partnerships and different ways of thinking about how police and mental health kind of respond to these issues.
Councilmember Hayner.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's great that outreach is going on. And how is that different from predictive policing?
Well, so the predictive policing is using historical data to inform officers where to go. So it's sort of establishing hot spots around certain areas at certain times, at least in the context of what we were using the predictive policing for previously. What we're doing now is trying to have a better sharing of information. So whenever there's police protected information, privacy information around medical history, what can never be successful is phone calls and emails to each other, or after something terrible happens, realizing that somebody else knew something that could have helped prevent something. So what we're doing is we're all coming to the table and sitting there, and while there's information I cannot share with community mental health, and there's information that community mental health cannot share with me, like the medical information, we can talk about things in an honest way, and we can inform them that, yes, this is a problem for us. We can't maybe speak to specifics unless there's a public safety issue, and they can inform us if this is perhaps somebody who is already receiving their services or not. But this is more about information sharing and relationship building with those groups so that everybody has the same information kind of to triage a problem versus using the data to inform sort of a blanket police presence in a specific area.
Thank you.
Further follow-up? So moving on to our next question number 6, and I realize that there are actually 7 questions, so
Okay.
you get a bonus round.
I love it.
And to keep us on track, we have you running to 10:48, pardon me, to 9:48, good Lord.
Thank you.
Yeah, no worries, man. So, change management. Describe a time when you were met with strong resistance to a change you implemented. How did you overcome it? So this goes to strong resistance to a change, and how did you overcome it?
So I don't necessarily know that I want to use recent examples, but so as you know, parking is an issue within the city, and recently had to communicate to staff at my department that they needed to park their personal vehicles in specific locations so that it did not take up community parking areas around this building. so that when you all are having your meetings, those spots are not being taken up by my department that are on duty. So I had to communicate this change early on in my tenure as the new guy at the department. So I've done this before where you need to make change and nobody's going to like it. So what we did was met with the folks that were going to be affected by this and talked to them about sort of the reasons behind it. There are legitimate reasons that reasonable people can appreciate that when there are community meetings here, there should be parking for community members. So there is resistance to change, as there always is. Worked with the city's HR department and city's legal department to make sure that when I'm sending out my mass email to the department to say you're no longer allowed to park in the Larkham lot or on Ann Street, that sort of I'm being consistent with past practices and kind of educating myself, especially as the new guy, on where the pitfalls might be in making this kind of a recommendation. But having met with the affected union ahead of time and kind of talking it over with them, and kind of begging their patience on what this meant, sent out this email. Had to send a couple clarifying emails because I didn't have enough details in order to get people to understand exactly what we're talking about. And sort of then kind of working up the chain to talk to Mr. Lazarus about were there other opportunities and other circumstances where maybe these officers could park closer, so like on major event days, like home football games, when there are no community events going on in the area. Could the officers park closer just for ease of changing their clothes and relocating over to the football stadium? So that's maybe kind of a pretty simplistic answer of change management, but it's always important to kind of understand and explain the need for change, to get buy-in for that change, even when it's very different than what has been experienced before, or when it's something that is not going to be liked. And then always being open to, after the change is done, being flexible. You've got to be able to be flexible to kind of modify what that change is. So just letting those officers know that we're going to be able to revisit this periodically and make changes to the plan, not because the plan is the end, but because there's a reason for this change. I think it's been received pretty well. Every few months, I get another email from the union saying, "Hey, can we make these changes?" And we discuss it, and sometimes we revise the original plan, and sometimes we don't.
Any follow-up? Councilor Lone?
Just wait, so this was a personnel situation, and I'm just wondering, it's one of the questions I think you've asked, is what was the most difficult personnel situation you've dealt with, and how did you deal with it? So are there any other examples outside of this parking?
So difficult personnel decisions I've
Yeah,
had to
the
make?
most difficult, yeah.
Yeah,
'Cause
so-
this was framed as this is obviously a personnel
Certainly.
change and challenge. Any others?
Yeah, so any time that I've had to make the recommendation to terminate or demote an employee, that is a very difficult decision and something I don't take lightly. So there are circumstances where I've had to make those recommendations here at this department, but the one I would speak most, I think would be more appropriate to talk about, would be at a former job. Circumstance, it was very difficult to me, especially working at the U of M, was I grew up there. And so I had to make a recommendation to terminate an employee of mine that had been a field training officer of mine, and he had sexually harassed a police cadet in the course of his job duties. And so what we did was the complaint came in. It was hard to believe that these allegations, when we were looking at them, it just didn't kind of jive with the person I knew. But we took it seriously, performed an internal investigation into the matter. I did the investigation, and at the end of the investigation, it was clear to me that the allegations were true, and that, so regardless of my thoughts and feelings of this person, I made the recommendation that they be terminated. And obviously spoke to the HR department about it, legal department about it, and my leadership about it. Recognized that this gentleman had never been disciplined before for anything like that, and generally we try to use a progressive disciplinary model, but that sometimes certain things are so serious that you have to take action on them regardless of whether it's happened or not. So we took a stand in saying that this is so unacceptable that we recommended termination.
Okay, thank you.
Moving on to our next and last question. This is with respect to council relations. Tell us about your relationship with your current governing body, aside from wild admiration.
That was, all right, that was,
Yeah.
I was gonna say.
So when we were on reading this,
Well, I haven't had nearly enough exposure to all of you yet. I've only been here for a year and a half. I receive requests for information. They get filtered to me, and so I'm providing you all with sort of some of the information that comes from our department. Some of you I've gotten to know a little bit better because I've come to community meetings to talk in your wards. Others we're setting up coffee. Others I spoke to on Wednesday night, but I think that that's an area where as a deputy chief, I'm trying to grow into it to have more personal interactions with all of you, but definitely as a chief, that would be something that I would want to foster and build.
follow-up? Councilmember Grant.
Thank you. Could you tell us, we've had sort of varied communication from chiefs, because some of us, even if we haven't been here that long, have been through a few chiefs. What would be your plans to communicate? Can you give us some examples? If
Yeah,
there's an
absolutely.
event
So
in
I
the
think-
community or?
Yeah, we've established a monthly report, or every council meeting, we have a report that's coming out to you guys, and some of the information that we think you want, so crime stats and then crash data. So I think having the relationship with you all to know what kind of information you want, there should be regular communications coming out of the chief's office, anticipating your needs and the information that you want. I don't know if you've read all of the packets that they've given you, but we're sort of in the process of also trying to get a handle on all of the data that we collect so that we can create some dashboards to have reports available. So this would be maybe something that we could provide access to you all on, if you have a special interest in your ward, of what kind of crimes are happening in the ward, what kind of crashes or community standards or parking tickets are being written in your wards, or citywide. So I think that there's an opportunity for us to do sort of as you want and as you need kind of information dashboard available to you, web-based. But I think also it would be appropriate to have regular face-to-face. So I talk a lot about data and I talk a lot about email and stuff, but really I think it's the personal face-to-face time that's spent. So I think as a chief, it would be appropriate to have regular meetings with wards or with council members if you all wanted.
Councilmember Eaton.
Thank you. So one of the things I've really enjoyed about Chief Faunus is that he would give us contemporaneous information about something that was happening, like the suspected active shooter event at the University of Michigan. But I know that the department is just inundated with information, and so can you tell us how you would filter what you think is need to know, and whether or not you would continue his practice of giving contemporaneous information?
Sure. So I had a boss that used to have a dry erase board that, written on that dry erase board was the phrase, "Who else needs to know?" And one of the similarities between U of M and Ann Arbor is that there are governing boards that want to know information and that need to know the information. So as a chief, it would be my job to make sure you all were aware of everything that's going on in the city. Now, there would be a learning curve to figure out where that line is of, so a potential active shooter in any school is going to be an obvious, you all need to know about it. There may be a lower threshold of armed robberies or pedestrian accidents with injury where we might come to kind of an understanding of what the notifications need to be. But I think that would be one of the first things that an incoming chief would need to figure out is what sort of, so we're not, kind of in my world, it's a notification policy for the chief or for the department of what are the types of incidents that you all need to know about. And we would sort of establish our own internal policy on when that is, so that if I'm chief, if I'm on vacation, whoever's the acting chief needs to know, it needs to be seamless for you all so that whoever the acting chief is can make those notifications. Or if I'm not available, there's a lieutenant on duty that knows while they're notifying me, perhaps they need to be making these other notifications. And with that said, it'll never be as fast as you want or as much information as you want. But if we're kind of giving you the heads up, I think we're headed down the right path.
We've got 2 minutes and, want to give time to, a question or a question or a close. So
I'll hold off there.
thank you. So if you have questions for the panel or have a final closing pitch or what have you, the 2 minutes are yours.
Sure. Well, I mean, I don't want to stifle questions. I can wrap up real quick if you have a question
Councilor
you
Blum.
want to
I
ask.
mean, this is your time, so.
This is our
Councilor
time.
Blum,
It's okay.
He's offered it to you.
Just on the notifications and sharing of contemporaneous information, I appreciate the questions that Councilmembers Grand and Eaton just posed. Just to clarify, because I think I've served with a few police chiefs, and I think we have seen with Chief Honest that the sharing of information, the rapid sharing of information in a timely and helpful way with incidents that occur in Ann Arbor has been exceedingly helpful, not only to us, obviously, but to the entire community. And I don't know about the whiteboard and, how things are filtered, but it's been a nice change. And so I'd be interested in knowing if that's the path that you see this trajectory of information sharing
Absolutely.
continuing on.
He's been my boss for the last year, and I've learned a lot from him. And I think it would make sense for me to build on everything that he's done. He's built a wonderful foundation for whoever the next chief is, and it's important that whoever the next chief is continues his work, especially in that area.
Okay, I'm good. You do your
Yeah.
close.
Yeah, well, so I mean, I don't really have like an official statement other than, I really love the city of Ann Arbor. I've spent 22 of the last 23 years, so my entire adult life, my entire real working life, I have spent working in the city of Ann Arbor. I'm not going anywhere. I love this place. Whether I'm deputy chief or chief, hopefully chief, I plan to spend my entire career here. I think there's a lot of opportunity for the department to make some small changes that will make a huge difference in the community, especially in the area of trust and transparency and kind of collaboration and working with the community and with you all and with the department. And I think those are really, if you were to have asked me what are my strengths, I would say building collaborative relationships is one of my strengths. And it's, again, it's not just me. There's the people that already work for the Ann Arbor Police Department are already doing that. There are a lot of really, really good people there that have been doing this and need a larger stage to continue doing it. So thank you very much for your time. You all thanked me for being here, but I want to be here. I want this job, and it's a pleasure to have time to talk to you all. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'll take a short break. Good morning. We are back after a short break. Welcome, Mr. Cox.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. So what we'll do is we have a set of questions that are being asked of all the various interviewees. We have 45 minutes. I'll try to keep it fairly tight. There will be some follow-ons along the way, but I'll try to get us to the end in sufficient time for you to close with, heck, whatever you'd like to close with.
I appreciate it. I'll do my best to answer.
All right, terrific. Leading off, question number one, please walk us through your law enforcement career to date.
Okay, so I've been a police officer in the city of Boston for 30 years. My current position is, I've been on the command staff for 14 years. My current position is superintendent. I'm in charge of the Bureau of Professional Development. That encompasses the Boston Police Academy, the Boston Police Range, where officers learn how to fire their weapons. Part of the Police Academy, we have a current class in there right now of 115 people. So we not only train new recruits, we train in service all the police officers in the city of Boston. So they come in for their continuing education, for legal updates, for other courses that we might have throughout the year. Every couple of years or so, everyone comes back through for some type of retraining. Prior to being at the Police Academy, I was a deputy superintendent in charge of the operations section of the police department, which you would probably refer to it as the 911 center. It had about 187 people that worked there. During my time there, we converted over to the next-gen 911 system, so now the city of Boston has text to 911. We did a few other things as far as setting up a quality assurance program, which the city didn't have prior to that, at least in the 911 center, and built a training center for the 911 center as well. We did a few things while we were there. Prior to that, I was a deputy superintendent in charge of the Internal Affairs Division, and the Internal Affairs Division encompasses several sections. One of the sections is called Audit and Review. Audit and Review would go around and do audits and checks of parts of the police department, most notably maybe the drug audit and the property audit to make sure that our property was efficiently being run and maintained, as well as to check and keep checks and balances that all our police procedures and policies were being followed by all the district captains throughout the city. As well as that unit, there was another unit within the Internal Affairs called Recruit Investigations. The Recruit Investigations unit is responsible for doing the background checks, basically an IHR function for the police department. We're doing all the background checks for both sworn and civilian that come to the city. And then, of course, the Internal Affairs section, I was responsible for reviewing all the complaints made against both sworn and civilians from the Boston Police Department, internal and external, and responsible for those investigations. As part of those investigations that we did, at the time, there was a oversight review panel that I was the lead liaison with the panel as far as having discussions with the group as far as the appeals for cases that we had made findings for. I had a pretty strong working relationship with those folks. Prior to that, I was a zone commander in several parts of the city, and that was responsible for the day-to-day activities, for the patrol activities, the resources within those districts, as well as the CompStat portion and the statistics and the quality of life findings that happened in that. Prior to that, I was a deputy superintendent in the Bureau of Investigative Services, where I was primarily responsible for the forensics division, where I initiated and started the latent print unit, which prior to my getting there used to be run by all sworn, but it was civilianized when I got there, where I had to hire the director and all the personnel there as a result of a misidentification of a print on an individual who was wrongly convicted. So we converted from sworn to civilian, the latent print unit, which is now ASCLD accredited. Also, forensics lab, the DNA, the crime lab, and the creation of the crime scene response unit, where we took some of the officers that were Previously in the latent print unit, we had them trained. We had the Henry Lee Institute in Connecticut come up and train our personnel in crime scene response techniques, and they are now another unit that was created when I was there. As well as the SORI unit and special investigations units were underneath me. That is about 14 years worth. I have another 16 years, but that's not me on the command staff. I know time is an issue. Would you like me to continue, or?
Perhaps we'll go to follow-on. I can't remember what I was doing 14 years
Okay,
ago. So.
well, I can, but you know, I don't wanna,
I'm sure you can.
you know, I don't know.
Are there follow-on questions to that?
If I may.
Please, Councilmember Eaton.
Yes.
So first, thanks for coming to Ann Arbor and applying. I note that you're working in a very big organization, and the numbers, like the budget for the whole department, is humongous. I note that you manage the PSAP grant of $3.7 million. Can you explain what that program was?
The PSAP, I'm not sure of that terminology, I'm sorry.
It's on,
Safety answering point,
okay,
public safety answering point.
public
Oh,
safety answering
yes,
point? I'm
PSAP
sorry,
grant.
you
Oh, yeah.
used that acronym.
Yeah, no, yeah, the PSAP, yeah, Public Safety Answering Point. Yeah, that was a grant referring to 911 tax dollars that, you know, that came out of our wireless bills.
Okay.
Went back to the state. The state portions some of that money back to public safety answering points based on their call volume. And that's the sole purpose of what that grant was.
So then,
For
back to my-
technology purposes.
Back to my other point, though, is you're working in a very large department with a really big budget. Are you going to have difficulty working in a small department with a very small budget?
I don't see it that way. So it's all based on, you know, well, size, you know, is relative, I guess. But it's what you're using it for. And so, you mean for the city of Boston, for that PSAP grant, that was covering a wide area that covers a lot of people. And that was a technology grant. And so technology tends to be fairly expensive. And that money also came from, you know, a source just for that, for technology, because they know cities and towns couldn't afford to pay that. That's the reason why the tax existed. I believe that would be an issue? I do not believe it would be an issue, but finances tend to be an issue no matter where you are, whether it's in my own home or,
I'm
you know.
just going to suggest that the $386 million budget for the entire Boston
Yes.
Police Department is almost as big as our entire budget here. So
Yes.
I just want you to
Yes.
understand that we're considerably less well-funded.
Correct, but I worked as a zone commander. It was an area that had about 120,000 people, and it had about a little less than 200 officers. It would be very similar to being here as far as size, and so yes, it's bigger, but you know, it's sizing down. I don't think it would be greatly more difficult. As a matter of fact, it would be more enhanced because I'd have more hands-on opportunity to meet and greet and talk and do some of the things that you'd really like to do.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Let's roll on to the next question, if we may. So this is question number 2. Why do you want to work for the Ann Arbor Police Department?
Wow. Well, first and foremost, Ann Arbor, I think it's a really great place to live. My oldest son, Michael Jr., actually went to school here, you know, and we fell in love with the area when he was going through the college process a long time ago. So, you know, first and foremost, that's the key. This is a place that we would want to live and be at. The police department, and I have to study a little bit about it because other than being here for games, I didn't know as much about the police department. But I mean, it is a very good police department, and I think, you know, having some of the experience that I do have, you know, particularly around community policing and handling some issues, you have an opportunity to come and be in a place and really take a very good place and make it one of the greatest police departments in this country. You know, and that, you know, really excites me in a lot of ways. It will be my last job in policing. There's no doubt about that. But the fact is, you know, this is where I would want to be. I was born and raised in Boston, and my wife were choosing to leave, but we want to go to a place where we want to live, and this is a very nice environment for us to be in and retire in, so to speak, at some point, 12 years from today or whatever. So You put all those factors together, this is an ideal place. I mean, there's a lot of good things here, and I believe that it's one of the things I can impact is take a very good police department and make it, a lot better in some way, shape, or form. And that challenge, really excites me, and so that's why.
Excellent. Follow-on questions? Councilmember Nelson.
Hi, thank you
Helen.
for being here.
Thank you.
I don't know if I'm allowed to say that I was extremely impressed just reading the materials in our binder about you. I have so many things highlighted that are like, oh my gosh, that's so interesting. You're in Area E right now? Is that your current position in Boston? You're like, is
No.
that the?
No, so my current position, I'm the superintendent in charge of the Bureau of Professional Development, which
Oh,
is
it's-
mostly known as the Police Academy. So I'm responsible for all professional development for all the police officers in the police
So how
department.
far back were you
As
working
long-
in Area E? Was that fairly recently?
That would have been in 2008, 2010, yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Reading through all your materials, I was trying to understand what area of the city that you were primarily working in, and Mike.
That was Area E when I was
Okay.
there. That included, and I don't know if you're familiar with Boston, but West Roxbury, Rosendale, Hyde Park, Jamaica Plain, Reedville, part of Boston area. Boston is made up of a bunch of little cities. You put them all together, that's Boston. But those were the areas that I was in.
I was curious to know if that particular area of Boston was impacted by a college community, if there was a campus anywhere in the vicinity.
Boston has colleges throughout the city, but not primarily, no. Not the Area E. It's mostly residential.
Okay.
There are some business sections of it, but it's mostly residential. And please forgive me if someone's watching out there and there's a college or university that I've left out in error, but for the most part, no. But one of the things about in Boston, because it's a small, big city, it's not like New York City, if you want to talk about size, Boston is not like that. When we do have events, when we have a ton of events, you have to participate in that, and I did quite a few special events, which now you have to deal with a ton of colleges and universities because we have many, many colleges and universities. So yes, I have experience in dealing with colleges and universities quite a bit.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Other follow-ons? Councilmember Lum.
Maybe this is, you pretty much welcome as well. And your answer, for why you want to work for the Arbor Police Department is very nice, and of course, and you also described this, you see this as your last job in policing, your long illustrious career. Can you just, what attracted you most, or what interested you most about this position and prospect? If there is any one
well,
particular thing.
One or two particular, well, to be frank, it is a very good police department, but in my time here, as far as community policing is concerned, I don't know how much of that you do. I mean, you do, some of it, but in comparison to where I'm from, where it's part of the fiber of the police department, where, I spend all day, the afternoons from Friday to 7 o'clock at night doing peace walks, walking around neighborhoods at the superintendent level. I mean, we have superintendent and deputies that do this all the time, between coffee with the cops and whatever. I mean, officers, volunteer their own time to participate in neighborhoods, to play softball, to go fishing, we're not even talking about the PAL, the sports leagues. Community policing is very much a fabric of where we're from, as far as activities in and with and through communities. And so sometimes, I remember back in Boston, before we were really big into that transition is a little bit more difficult. But it's a very good police department, but I don't see that level of community policing. And so the opportunity actually to come in and help a police department transition to that, something like that, through the neighborhoods and see it actually happen, intrigues me a great deal.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
So let's roll to question number 3. This relates to community relations.
Sure.
So in your opinion, what are some of the most significant challenges that police officers face? And what is the best way to meet those challenges?
Well, I mean, we have a lot of challenges right now in policing in general. Most of it really comes from public perception. Some of it's our own doing, and then some of it maybe not so much. I think it's really important for officers to really understand, what people want, that what we're here for, and the customer service portion of policing, and the value that we bring to people in the sense that, we're public servants, but the fact is people want to be respected and treated well all the time. And I think that's really important at a time when and I'm not speaking for Ann Arbor, but some places you go, people don't welcome the police, and they'll make that quite vocal to them. But police are human, and no one likes to not feel welcomed. And so sometimes police shut down, and they don't seem welcoming themselves. And then that's something, I think is part of professional development, and helping officers understand that we're here kind of like a public servant, and we need to understand that we're not here, then the citizens aren't here to please us, but we're here to please them in some way, shape, or form, and that's our duty. And so the more we, maybe accept and understand some of these things and make it a part of what we do, because it's a very difficult job. We do a whole bunch of things right now that maybe aren't always part of policing, but we do so many things. But if we accept that part of it, maybe it makes it easier to deal with some of the negativity that's out there right now. As a result of some of that stuff, it's harder to get people in policing, and I think we need to do a better job of, through engagement with the public, of reaching out to, certainly younger people, to get them interested in policing. I think there's a whole group of this generation of kids out there that want to give back in every way possible. There's no better job to give back in than in policing, but yet that is not, what the narrative is out there. There's less and less young people that want to do this job. And so hopefully we're able to change some of the narrative about policing for these future generations, because unfortunately I think policing is here to stay, so to speak, but the fact is if our numbers continue to go down, that could be an issue in the future.
Follow up, Councilor Reed.
Thank you. So I assume that you know that we've adopted a police oversight ordinance and we've formed a police oversight commission. When you learned of that, what was your reaction, and did that affect your desire to apply here?
No, because in Boston we already have one, and when I was in Internal Affairs I worked with them, quite often, so it was not a big deal to me. As a matter of fact, I probably welcome it. The thing about oversight, and I think it happened internally where I was from, there's a lot of anxiety, both from the officers and sometimes from the public perspective about oversight. And I look at it as a sense that, you hear transparency used a lot, but the fact is we don't really have anything to hide. And I think, in policing, we don't always educate the public or educate folks on what we do and how we do it. And the Oversight Commission is just an opportunity for that education process to exist even, in a more transparent way. If we do something wrong, I think we need to admit it, so I think that's important for everybody. But when we don't do anything wrong, then we need to explain to people why we didn't do it wrong, as opposed to just saying we're not going to answer that. And I think the Oversight, Committee is an opportunity to exchange, dialogue back and forth with a group looking at the same problem and explaining why we did what we did. And if they show some things that maybe we should change, then maybe we should change them, But the fact is, without that dialogue, you kind of stay stagnant sometimes, and you need a different perspective to stay relevant, as part of customer service. People change, we evolve sometimes, and what was good in policing 10 years ago might not be good today, but that, happens slowly sometimes, and maybe these groups, oversight committees will help us, evolve for the better. But I think the chief's job is to make sure that the officers understand the value in it and that they feel secure as well in doing their job, as they also have support, and I think that's very important as well.
Councilmember Grant.
Thank you.
Yes.
So I'm intrigued by what you said about community policing being integrated into the fiber of what you do, and you're involved in training. So what do you do to help instill that ethic in terms of both new police officers, so in the academy, and also as part of your retraining with your officers?
Well, so, the training, the curriculum is fairly standard, but at least in our department. But, we have, unbiased policing and procedural justice as part of the curriculum. We have an in-service, not in-service, we have a portion of the training where officers actually go out and do community policing, as part of a rotation before they actually hit the streets. They go out and actually see community groups, how we work with groups and things of that nature, while they're probationary recruit officers. So by the time they get on the streets, they're familiar with community policing. So it's not a foreign object to them, so to speak. It's a part of what they do. And so as you have more and more generations of police officers that come, community policing, it's just like, yeah, that's my job, right? They don't think about it. As opposed to when you come on in a different model, you see it more like, that's not my job. I just answer calls. I just go to calls, and that's a change of culture a little bit in mindset or whatever. And so that's, hopefully, did I answer your question in that way?
I think so. Yeah, I'm thinking maybe a little more, a little more prospectively. So then, what is a step that you might take to change that culture here?
Well, so first I have to be here, and it's hard to change a culture until you're actually in it, because, it might already exist, and then being an outsider coming in and, making judgments on people is difficult, and I shouldn't do that because I don't know enough about it to do that. So I'm going to have to assume that, there's a ton of, good men and women that work here. I already met a few of them, and they are very good and they're sincere, and I don't think that's an issue. But just really looking at, the training, what they've done, and incorporate some, new ideas into maybe, what they haven't been exposed to, and then have some conversations with them as a group about how we can go about doing things and engaging the public differently.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Moving on to the next question. If you could please tell us about a time when you had to problem solve with a city council or governing body. So with respect to this problem solving, what role did you play and what was the outcome?
It's a little different, and now this is the difference between a bigger place and a smaller place. We don't really problem solve with city council too much. They approve our budgets and things of that nature. I mean, they ask questions about issues. I know, there's the education portion. They might ask questions about police budgets, or are there any tools that we might need to help us get the funding for that. But in a sense that, they too, in the city, participate in community policing. When they say community policing, it's really, I should say, neighborhood policing, in a sense that, when you do these neighborhood walks, when you go around in these community groups, city council joins us from time to time. There's members of, the clergy that join us. It's not just a police, it's a community issue. So different walks and segments of the city actually go around and participate in these things. It's not just one segment. As far as, I'm still trying to think about problem solving. I think problem that we solve within the police department, the mayor certainly has something to do with it, because he funds us, and part of my position is I'm kind of like a report to him. So I would say, almost everything that we do, he would have some involvement in, as far as, dealing with the citizens, as far as making sure that they are okay about the effects. I'm struggling to answer this one. Don't mind me. Campbell. I'm trying to think of a concrete thing to answer your question. And
That's all right.
There's many things running through my head right now. But I would say that, just the multitude of community events that the city has that we go to and do whenever there's a rash in crime, or, a particular incident that happens. I do know, whether it's the mayor's office or, some members of city council, they will organize something in a particular neighborhood that we certainly come and participate. We bring our police ice cream truck. We bring our other officers that are there to engage the public. We have a host of ways that we engage the public where we're from, and so that's what we do. And then we get the other involvement from our other partners throughout the city to do that. That partnership it's been in place for a bit, so it's not like something we think about, like, they have to organize to make that happen. So I apologize if I didn't answer the question correctly.
Any follow-up?
Can we have a police ice cream truck?
Budget season is right around the way.
Mr. Mayor, just real quick.
Oh, you've already been on the queue with Councilmember O'Malley?
No, go ahead.
And and thank you and welcome to our community. Appreciate your time and interest. This kind of falls with question number 3 perhaps, but with the other issues surrounding policing in today's world is the fact of our issues here as a nation, our immigration issues, sanctuary cities, federal government coming down on local municipalities, asking them to enforce federal laws at the local level. Something we haven't heard yet, and if you could maybe shine some light on where you can, I guess, on the struggle right now that we are facing in a different realm with that issue, with immigration and the federal government and the funding, the power of the purse and that kind of stuff, and how local municipalities are struggling with protecting their citizens, or protecting the residents, protecting their community amongst the attack from the federal government.
So I think I understand your question. So, one of the good things, as I think as a police chief, is that, although it is very political, we're not politicians. So I don't think we should engage in that conversation. But the conversation about protecting the citizens that work in the community, that's something we should do. I think certainly, whether it's with you all, or certainly with the mayor, about, having, conversations about what you think is best for the community, well, that would go into how we enforce or not enforce things. But I don't think publicly it's my role, or would be my role, to spar with the federal government, so to speak, because I wouldn't say nothing good comes from that, but I just don't think that's my role. However, you can have, it's what you do, it's not what you say, in my opinion, and acts speak way louder than words, so if I understand what the intent of certainly what the mayor and what you all and what the city wants, I would imagine the police department would be following that intent. But I don't think it's necessarily, we need to make people feel safe, and I think that is a role that I would have, and I would absolutely do that. But I don't think I would engage in Twitter and tweets and whatever about trying to put out an agenda, because our only agenda is public safety and making people in this community feel safe. That's what would be my agenda, so to speak, because, but not a political one from that matter. I hear what you're saying about the power of the purse and things of that nature, and that's the reason why I think it's best just to stay local and deal with, as a chief's position, to deal with the issues that are here, and not engage in some of that stuff, because, they can take money away, they can do things of that sort, but you don't always have to make it easier for them, by putting Twitter and tweets and things like that out in the forefront of that, in my opinion, like some people do. So this conversation is way more political right now than I've probably ever been, so I'm going to stop now.
Thank you. We have our end period, our end site in time in mind, and a couple more questions. So I'm going to go with blinders for a little bit.
Yep.
Thank you. It goes with respect to innovation.
Yes.
So creative people seem to offer new insights frequently. Give us an example of a time when one of your insights or innovations was particularly well received by others.
Well, you say particularly well received. So it's been my opinion sometimes that, you come up with an innovative site, but human nature for some folks, they don't like change. So, you might come up with an innovative idea, but the reality is you have to understand that you're dealing with humans and that sometimes change is difficult for them. So you have to figure out a way to transition, these people to that change and get them to like that. So, I've done it throughout my career in many different ways. Most recently, something as simple as the police academy, we used to have all our exams written by paper. So we'd have stacks and stacks of paper for these exams, killing thousands of trees or what have you. And I said, why haven't we just converted electronically for these exams? I don't see the reason why we can't do that. And of course, change is difficult for a lot. Well, can we do that? And so, I had a few people come in. We ordered some laptops and did that and converted the stuff over. But it's still just something as simple as, getting exams electronically. For some folks, the way that they do business changed, and so you have to kind of help them through that change, so to speak. And so, make a long story short, we converted these exams over. Everyone sits there saying, oh my gosh, we can now do these exams in half the time. We get the exam scores back so much faster. And they appreciate that change after the fact. But when you initially started, it didn't really feel that way. In the 911 Center, the same thing. When they started the quality assurance program, as well as creating this training program, some people didn't understand the need. Oh, I know my job. We've been doing this for X amount of time. And the fact is, let's build it and let's see what happens, and you help ease them into it, and then you start to bring more trainings and things of that nature, and people start to appreciate it after the fact. One of the things unfortunately, after the marathon bombing, I was in the 911 Center when that happened, as a matter of fact, and worked there for like 3 straight days. But after the fact, some of the people that actually worked there, came and thanked me for the development that we had actually, put into the people that worked there, but, as far as making sure they were trained and some of the newer equipment that they got. And they appreciated the fact that, they thought about prior to my arrival, it's like, hey, you actually invested into us and helped us through our development. And, when we had that event and our phones were ringing off the hook and all those calls were coming in, I was really comfortable helping all those people that we helped, helping them find their loved ones, or helping them, understand that, they might not get into their home for this amount of time, or helping them through whatever we were going through, even though I didn't know what was going on. And that was through training that you helped us through that. So I'm not a technology person. I have not invented anything, but I just find that going around and asking people questions about what they do and how they do it to seek out weaknesses, in what they're doing, or as far as what we can address, is important. And then going out and seeking ways to improve that. But before you bring in technology, you should understand that technology is for people. And people, need a transition in preparing for that technology and implementing it. So, long-winded answer to your question, but hopefully I answered it.
Follow on? Councilor Ackerman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Mr. Cox, for being here. Welcome.
Thank you.
Nationally and locally, the societal effects of mental health and substance abuse are on everyone's radar, and increasingly so. How has your experience at the Boston Police Department, and how will that inform any innovation on how our police department helps mitigate those effects?
Well, from a policing standpoint, it's just in preparing the officers and how to maybe understand and identify a person that might have a mental illness that they're dealing with. And there are, a few trainings out there to how to do that, particularly involving de-escalation and slowing down of the interaction, when they're dealing with someone that may have a mental health issue, just to make sure that, we don't escalate something that otherwise didn't need to be because you're dealing with somebody who's impaired. There's some training out there, and that would be one thing, hopefully, that the officers, if they haven't already gone through it, would go through it here as well, as an interaction with citizens that may have mental health conditions, and understanding and identifying, if that's the case beforehand, and more importantly, how to react, how to slow the situation down, and how to get more help from your peers before, really starting to interact with that person, just to make sure that we don't overreact to that situation.
Rolling on to question number 6, you sort of already hit this, and so I'm going to give you I'm going to ask you the question, but give you the freedom to say, move on, you think you've hit it.
Okay.
But if there's something else you want to say,
Okay.
bless you, say it.
Okay.
This is with respect to change management. Describe a time when you were met with strong resistance to a change you implemented. How did you overcome it?
Well, I semi kind of answered that, I think, so. Can we move on, I guess?
Move on, and if you want to cycle on back.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Okay.
All right, this gets to council relations. So tell us about your relationship with your current governing body, and you know, whether that's a governing body of you know, officials or supervisors or what have you
Well-
in the org structure. How do you ensure good communication with them?
Okay, so, you know, within our organization, you know, there's certainly meetings at the command staff level, and now we have a police commissioner, so, you know, we meet and talk about certain topics and subjects, and it's always respectful, and it's pretty open. You know, you have a duty to, I think, no matter who it is, whether it's your boss or, you know, your coworker, is to be honest and give, you know, appropriate feedback before decisions are made if you're having a discussion about something. Might not be the boss, and someone else can choose whether or not we do it or not, but the fact is, you have a duty to make sure that that person is making an informed decision. And that kind of relationship, you know, applies to everyone, whether it's a city councilor or something that has an idea that they think is really good, and they'll explain it, and, you know, you could, you know, tell them the truth, whether it's, if you believe it's good or bad, but more importantly, tell them the reasons why that you think the way you do. And I think that's really the relationship I have with everyone, you know, up or down in the organization or outside the organization, is, you know, honest, you know, feedback, appropriate feedback, you know, and dialogue to make sure that good decisions are made. I think that's it.
Any follow-ons? Councilor Lum.
Yes.
Sorry, about the time you met with strong resistance. So you described when you rolled out the online tests for officers in Boston and that transition and what was involved. I'm wondering if you could maybe give us an example of a difficult situation where you encountered where there was community, so external community pushback or opposition, and how you may have dealt with that.
External. So I will give another example, and it's both internal and external. When I was running internal affairs and we had the oversight committee, there was some strong resistance internally about the oversight committee, particularly within the people who were doing the investigation. And so I spent a great deal of time really developing them in a sense that, you know, we brought in some people from the law school, and we created a format, you know, for how we write our investigations. We spent time and effort on, you know, some additional investigative tips and tools, you know, in developing the individuals who work there, and let them understand that we need to be as professional as possible. And it really doesn't matter, you know, as far as transparency is concerned, who's looking at the case. As long as we're really strong in what we do and how we do it, it doesn't matter about that. And so changing the focus from this, you know, what people might have perceived as a hostile, you know, entity that's overlooking our stuff, to we need to develop our professionalism and not worry about that, which worked quite well. On the other end of that, at least working through, you know, the oversight committee, people had questions about what we do and how we do it, you know, along the way about some of those cases. And it was an education process, you know, where you have to explain in detail why we do the things that we do, and be able to do that is important. And along the way, I think you find a lot of common ground and understanding. So it would take situations where people might think something was totally inappropriate, to when they understand that how we train and the things that we do and why we do it, to saying, okay, now I see that now. And that education process is really important, but that only comes from dialogue, as opposed to just listening to one side and then not giving that dialogue. And so that's kind of like another example of dealing. It was more hostile inside than outside, because I don't consider outside hostility hostile, because our duty is to listen to it, right? The public, we're here to serve the public, so if they're mad, happy, sad, it doesn't really matter. So I'm not going to see it that way. You know, it just means it's part of my duty to deal with it. So
Thank you.
you're welcome.
Any follow-on questions? Councilor Reed.
So our department has a really good history of strong relationships with the county sheriff and the university's public safety department. Is there anything in your experience where your department worked collaboratively with other departments or other law enforcement?
Yeah, absolutely. The city of Boston is a small, big city, even though it's bigger than Ann Arbor. And the reality is, with all the public events that we have, particularly all the celebrations and all the colleges, and that, we are nowhere near large enough to be able to handle all those events. So we have to work seamlessly with all our college, police partners and other cities and towns around the area to help us do those events, from the marathon to, oh my gosh, all the other celebrations that we have in parades and other weekly events. I mean, they're not part of the police force, but every single weekend or weekday, it seems like that they are, and we absolutely need them, and we have a strong communication with all our campus partners to do that. So I would imagine here would be the exact same way, and that would be something that I would want and continue, and if not, develop more.
Any follow-ons? Councilmember Hayner.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I had a question about nuisance crimes. I'm not sure if this is something that applied in Boston, but we get questions about it here as our council reps. Things like panhandling, graffiti, petty thefts, and things like that. And do you have any comment on your relationship or your experience with those types of crimes?
Yeah, I mean, being in policing for 30 years, how we responded to some of those at one point is going to be different to how we might respond today. It's really based on the community, not the really community. So, in a business community, sometimes, you're having to help those people move along, when it's interfere with business, it's important. It's a fine line between, although some of those are crimes, do you really want to enforce it? And that's really a community question. That's really a question as a community that we need to resolve. From policing, we enforce laws, but the reality is, do we need to enforce strictly all the laws? No, we pick and choose sometimes which ones. And that's usually based on what the community prefers or wants, so to speak. And so, as being a member of that community, I would figure out, what those are beforehand before we put that out there. Now, certainly there's laws out there that we have to enforce all the time. Anything to do with public safety, there's no doubt about that. That's a no-brainer, and that's not up for discussion. But how we do it is far more important sometimes than what we do. So if there's an issue with a nuisance, we can do something about that nuisance really without, creating, criminalizing that individual for life, so to speak. It's how you do things sometimes is important, but not really being here right now to understand, what you might be referring to. I think that's the best I can do.
Oh, I appreciate it. Thank you.
I appreciate it. Yep.
So we've got about another 2 minutes or so to keep your time on par with anyone. If you have a question that someone might answer, or if you don't need a question, a
Yeah.
closing statement of some kind.
Oh, so one question
Sure.
is, what would be the biggest thing that you all would be looking for a chief that doesn't currently exist?
We're about to give you 22 answers.
Oh. Okay, well, all right then. Then,
Councilmember Nelson, go for it.
I guess I would say that we are at a really interesting juncture in the city right now because we have this very new body of the Independent Oversight Commission. And so what we don't have now, simply because we're just at such a beginning.
Yeah.
We don't quite know what that relationship is gonna look like between the police department and the Oversight Commission. I think we have a plan, but we don't know what it's gonna look like yet, just because it hasn't really started yet. So that's one of the, I appreciate what you had to say about the Oversight Commission in Boston, because that's where we're at as a community.
yeah. And I would say that it's important, whoever gets the job, and, there's two other really good candidates, I got to meet them. I think it's important to go into it understanding that it's okay. That anxiety that exists currently is just really from the unknown. But the reality is, it's an education process that, if we're in the wrong, then we should admit that when I say the police department, we did something wrong, then it's okay to admit it, and that helps people move on, so to speak. If we're not, then we need to educate folks, as far as that committee, on why it's not wrong. Because otherwise, tomorrow, they're going to still say it's wrong again. People are going to keep coming back with the same thing. If you don't educate them on what procedures and policies and why we do it, then they're always going to keep coming back complaining, so to speak. So there's an education process that has to occur. So whoever, I would say, gets the job really needs to feel pretty comfortable educating folks on, what and how police do their job here in Ann Arbor, when dealing with that. That's what I would say regarding that. So.
Thanks. Do you have you got about a minute? Tell us
So-
a closing of some kind?
Well, again, don't have much of a closing,
That's
but
all right.
I've been in policing a long time. I've done a ton of jobs. There was a whole bunch of them that I didn't mention prior to being on the command staff. But I will say this, that, certainly for the last, 25 years or so, I've done nothing but educate myself into doing this job that I'm trying to do for you all, in a sense that I finished my undergrad while a police officer. I went and got my master's degree in criminal justice as a police officer, and I just finished an MBA program at Boston University in the Questrom School of Business, an executive MBA program, all while on the job. The entire time was taking the information I learned and how can we bring that to bear in policing. And I've tried to do it everywhere I've gone. I've been a police officer 30 years. Clearly, I really love the job. It's not like the job. I love the job. But I don't like the image and perception that we've had over the years, and I've been trying to change that through educating the members that work for me and the public along the way. I've been around for a bit. I get every community is different, but we're all the same. We're people. And we all want the same. We want to be respected. We want to live well. We want to enjoy each other's company. And understanding that going in, that's all you would get from me, a respectful person that who will be respectful of your time and of your efforts and will listen to you and try to implement what I believe is best for Ann Arbor. And if not, we don't agree, I will tell you the reasons why as best as I can. So that's all I
Excellent.
have to say.
Well, I'd like to echo everyone's thanks for you coming on in
Well,
to
thank you
speak
for
with us
having
and
me.
with all the other various members of the communities. We very much appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
All right, let's take a short break.
Thank you.
We are back after a short break, so welcome.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure to have you here. We are now, just to recap for you and the public, I'll be asking a set of questions that have gone to all the various candidates. There will be probably some occasional follow-ons throughout, and then it'll be about 45 minutes. We'll close with with whatever you'd like to say, and then call it a day.
Okay.
Excellent. Again, thank you so much for coming to Ann Arbor. We appreciate it. So question number one, this relates to overall experience. Please walk us through your law enforcement career to date.
Absolutely. Can everybody hear me? Do I have to really bend over? So I started in Southfield, Michigan in 1985. I began in patrol, pretty much like everybody does, and I worked in patrol for about a year or so, and then I went into traffic section. I worked in traffic for about 4 years, and then an opportunity came along that I applied for and was selected to be a DARE officer. And I worked in DARE for about 5 years, and that was probably the first exposure that I had to the impact and the influence that I could have in the community in a positive way. So it wasn't just teaching in the classroom. I was able to interact with the students. I developed after-school programs and really created some strong relationships with not only the students, but with teachers and their parents and everybody else, and it was a very influential time. People have asked me, does the DARE program really keep people off drugs? And I don't know what the answer to that is. I kind of doubt one brief period of time is going to have some lasting effect. But I will tell you that the brief time that I had with those kids, doing after-school programs, and eating lunch with them and everything else, did have a long-lasting effect, and it was a profound effect. I had one young lady who told me she played college basketball, and she said it was because of me. And I said, well, I don't know about that, but thank you anyhow. And I used to see kids years after I had left the program who would still recognize me in other cities, actually. So it was a very impactful period. After that, I applied for and I became an evidence technician. They call them police specialists. And so for the next 2 years, I went around processing crime scenes. After that, in 1997, I got promoted to sergeant. I supervised patrol and traffic for a short period of time, and then I became the crime prevention supervisor. I created the department's first bicycle patrol program. I wrote the policy for that, acquired all of the information, or all the equipment, and did a lot of good things there, too. I was, again, in charge of DARE and school resource officers, and we did a lot of things, again, to outreach to the community and make a difference for them. So we streamlined our security survey process for residents. It's very difficult to do that for a business because they're very different and very involved. But for the residential surveys, they're pretty straightforward. But we streamlined it and made it into a checklist. We attached things and information on there. So for example, if we're telling somebody they need an 1.5 inch throw on their deadbolt, we would actually attach pictures to show them what that meant. Give them a list of contractors that were approved that could come out and do those things for them. So it made another difference that way. In 1999, I was promoted to lieutenant. I did 1.5 years total as a watch commander, working both afternoons and midnights. I did 1 year in patrol administration, where I was a liaison between the deputy chief and the watch commanders. And I did department scheduling as well as the internal affairs. I did 1 year in staff services, which was training, impound yard, media relations, and background investigations. In 2003, I was promoted to deputy chief. I did 3.5 years or so in the patrol division, commanded the patrol division, and then I finished out my career in the investigations division. So I had an opportunity to command and oversee every aspect of the police department at one point or another. I was a deputy chief for 10 years. I retired from Southfield in July of 2013. Decided I didn't like retirement, and so in November of 2013, I became the chief of police in Prescott Valley, Arizona. It's a department, it's a full-service department. It's one of the fastest-growing communities in the state. We are adding about 1,500 residents a year right now, 60 new home starts a month. And so it's a booming town. It's a full-service department, 75 sworn, about 101 current employees total, and we're going to be adding 2 more police officers this budget cycle, and so we'll be up to about 103 total employees.
Excellent. Any follow-up? Great. So, another general question. Why do you want to work in the Ann Arbor Police Department?
Well, my wife and I are coming back to Michigan regardless. We've already sold our house, and we have a closing date. So we're coming back one way or another. I believe, like I said, I tried retirement once and I didn't like it. I don't think I am ready for it just yet either. I think I still have a lot to offer, and I think Ann Arbor, this is very close to my family, Ann Arbor is, but aside from that, it just speaks for itself. The history here, the outdoor recreational opportunities. Some of you who have met my wife know that she's very athletic and outdoorsy. She's runs, I don't know, she's probably run 50 marathons, 9 Boston marathons, and has completed 2 Ironmans. So she looks at Ann Arbor as a training ground. She's really excited about being here. In fact, she's been out running the trails ever since we got here. And I like a challenge, and I see some things, and I think I can make a difference here in this community. And I think the big difference is, when I was a deputy chief and going through my career, I had a lot of ideas, and sometimes those ideas would be implemented, a lot of times they weren't. And so you always think you know what's going to work. You think you know how you're going to impact a community. But now for 5.5 years, I've been able to put those ideas into practice, and I can tell you that they do work and made a huge difference in Prescott Valley. And so I believe I can make a difference here as well.
Any follow-up? Councilmember Grant.
Thank you. You said about putting ideas to work. Can you give us your favorite example?
Well, let me
Maybe
say
one that's
this.
much relevant to
When
you.
I came to Prescott Valley in 2013, my predecessor had just left, not under the best of terms. He was the chief of police, and he belonged to a motorcycle gang. Those two things usually don't go together very well. And so it really didn't go together because he went to Prescott with his gang, and they got into a bar fight in Prescott. And so he was gone, and then right on the heels of that, in Arizona, they have photo radar and red light cameras, and they did in Prescott Valley, until they found out that some of the officers were fixing the tickets for people that they knew and things like that. So there was these two controversies that happened almost right on the heels of each other. So the community trust was way down. The department was in pretty much disarray. There was a lot of dissension in the department. There was a lot of unhappy people. There was several of them told me when I got there they were considering leaving and going to other agencies. So probably the best thing that we did was we turned that completely around by just getting out into the community, getting to know people. I know all my officers. They know me. They know my wife. My wife comes in all the time. They know my dog. I bring my dog to work a lot of times. We just made a culture in the police department that people wanted to come to work. They enjoyed coming to work. And all those people that were talking about leaving and going somewhere else, none of them did.
Further questions?
I'm explaining it that well?
Oh, it's a quiet bunch. All right. We're moving on now to community relations, if we may. So in your opinion, what are some of the most significant challenges that police officers face? And what is the best way to meet those challenges?
So, I've been asked that question a lot. What are usually it's the two greatest challenges facing law enforcement today. And the first one is the loss of trust between law enforcement and the communities they serve, and recruiting and hiring. And I'm going to tell you, those two things are absolutely connected and interrelated. If you don't hire and recruit the right people to put into the neighborhoods, you're never going to gain the trust of those people that you're serving. And so what have I done to address that? So when I got to Arizona, we had a recruiting and hiring process in place that consisted of a physical fitness test, a written test, and then an oral interview in that order. So the physical fitness test consisted of push-ups, sit-ups, and a 1.5 mile run based on the Cooper's Institute out of Texas. In each one of those categories, you had to score in the 40th percentile. So for example, if you had to do push-ups, you had to do 29 push-ups. If you did 28, you failed. And so I looked at this, and we were getting eligibility lists of 4 or 5 people. And after you do a background with that small of a pool, you might end up with one, but sometimes you didn't end up with any, and we'd have to do it over again. And so I saw this as a process that was really designed to eliminate people instead of trying to get them to succeed. So I sat my executive staff down and I said, what is it that we're looking for in a police officer? What are the traits that we want to see in somebody? And so they said, oh, you know, problem-solving skills, ability to reason through situations, empathy and compassion. And to my surprise, nobody said 29 push-ups. And so I said, okay, if these are the traits that we're looking for, how do we find that? How do we get there? Oh, those are in the oral board questions that we give them. But you're not getting to the oral board because you're kicking them out for doing 28 push-ups. I can teach somebody to get stronger. I can't teach empathy. So since they came up with the answers, they bought into the fact that we were going to completely revise our recruiting and hiring practice. So what we did was we still wanted them to go to the academy in some semblance of shape. So we had it as an average of the 40th percentile. So you could do 15 push-ups, you could do a lot of sit-ups, or maybe you were a fast runner. But as long as all 3 of them averaged out to the 40th percentile, it was a pass. Second thing was on the written test, they didn't give out the study guides that we had available to give out because they costed money. And so I said, well, give them out, take a $5 deposit. If they don't bring it back, then we got the $5, we'll buy a new one. And then the second thing was there was things in there like on the math portion, they weren't allowed to use a calculator. And I said, if I ask you to do a math problem right now, what are you going to do? Whip out the old phone and go to the calculator, right? Why are we asking these guys to do something that they're never going to do when they're out on the road? So let them use a calculator. And then we got to the oral board, and we were going through the oral board, and I remember debriefing our oral board one day, and they kept on pointing to this one female on the list, and they said, boy, she's going to be a superstar one day. She's going to be great for somebody. And I said, well, why is she number 11 if she's that good? And they said, well, you know, her physical fitness score kind of moved her down on the list. So I said, again, we're creating these lists in this on arbitrary factors. Why would you move somebody who you've just determined is going to be a superstar and let their physical fitness score move them down the list? So I said, okay, let's do physical fitness pass fail. They get the 40th percentile, it's a pass. If you get above a 70% on the written, it's a pass. We get rid of those 2 things. Rank it solely on their oral board scores. She moved up to number 2. She is a superstar, but she works for us. So hopefully that answered the question.
So reviewing the materials you submitted, I'm really impressed with the homework that you did, looking at our city and our department, including the Hillard Hines report. So obviously you know that we've created a police oversight commission.
Yes.
Can you tell me what your reaction was when you found that we had a police oversight commission? Did that affect your desire to apply here?
Absolutely not. I completely support the mission and the purpose of the commission. And it's, somebody asked me back home, and they said, don't you think that's going to be a problem? And I said, no. And actually the way I plan on selling it to the members of the police department is, if you turn your homework in to your teacher and you know that they're not going to look at it and they're not going to grade it, how good of a job are you going to do? You're probably not. If I know that somebody's going to be looking at what we do and evaluating what we do, doesn't that help us do a better job? And I think it does. I'm not opposed to somebody reviewing or giving input into what we do. I often tell people, just because I'm the chief of police doesn't make me the smartest guy in the room. When I am looking at doing something different in the police department or want to implement new ideas, I always seek input from everybody when appropriate. And so I just view this as the same thing. They're gonna be offering their input and suggestions. And then it also gives me an opportunity to impart some knowledge or understanding to the commission so that we can work together. And I look forward to it.
Follow-ons? Excellent. So you've touched upon this a little bit already, but let's go to it still. This is with respect to problem solving. Tell us about a time you had to problem solve with city council. What role did you play, and what was the outcome?
So one of the, I don't know if it's controversial, but we wanted to adjust or change our alarm ordinance. So for the last 60 years, law enforcement around the country has responded to residential and commercial burglar alarms. And for 60 years, 98% or more of those are false. And it is such a drain on resources to send police officers, because you always send two, and you have to send them around the country. So we were going to take this proposal to council to have the alarm ordinance changed, but we knew that there was going to be some pushback, and there certainly was from the alarm industry especially. And so we wanted to do our homework. So what we did was we looked at the percentage of false alarms. In Prescott Valley, it was 98.2% that were false. There was, we looked at it nationally, what it was nationally. We looked at the number, we tried to find the number of actual times that a burglar alarm had been effective, whether you caught somebody or anything like that. And so we gathered all this information, but probably one of the most impactful things we did was we had the local newspaper put out a survey. And the question was, if you knew that the police were responding to a particular call for service and 98% of the time it was going to be false, would you want them to continue to respond? And it was like 75 to 80% of the respondents said absolutely not, which represents the number of people who don't own alarms. Alarm ownership in Prescott Valley is about 22%. So the rest of the community is disparately impacted by that because they're not getting our service because we're over here on something that doesn't make sense. So when we presented all this information, including the survey results, the council unanimously approved that ordinance. And so now we have a verified response. Any burglar alarm has to be either being witnessed, manual manipulation of like a button, like a panic alarm or panic button, or video verified. And in that case, we'll do it. So we went from 800 alarms a year to 19.
Follow-ons? Councilmember Ramla.
Sorry, and thank you for coming to our community and opening up your book for all of us and the homework that you did. Now, doing that, was there any unforeseen consequences? Did crime rates go up somewhere? Did you have slower response times when there were, incidents? What was the trade-offs other than the benefits? I mean, were there any negative effects of that policy change?
On the alarms?
Yeah.
No, I don't think there's any negative side of it at all. It absolutely increases morale because officers don't like going out on them. And in fact, it's a dangerous call because officers know in their head that it's going to be false 98% of the time, and they become very complacent and lazy, not lazy, but very complacent on those calls, and that becomes a safety risk. But not having to go out on them anymore, officers' morale goes up because they don't have to deal with it anymore. And our officers have better use of their time. I remember one of the arguments that the alarm industry said, so even if the alarm is false, your officer is in that neighborhood now. And again, we have to remember the vast majority of alarm owners are not the parts of the community that really need the burglar alarms. They're the disenfranchised or the minority sections of the communities generally don't have burglar alarms. They have bars on their windows or doors, but they don't have alarms. So why are we spending all of our time in the rich neighborhoods, if you will, and we're wasting our time there? And so that argument was seriously flawed. And I said to them, I would rather deploy my resources based on legitimate data instead of chasing something around that doesn't make any sense. So yeah, there was really no negative downside to it at all.
Follow on? Councilmember Griswold.
I really appreciate this change, and you described it to me in the meet and greet. A follow-up question would be, so what are you doing in the poorer neighborhoods to address security, given that you have additional resources because you're not going out on these false calls?
So, right, so then that allows our officers to have that time and availability to be patrolling and working in those neighborhoods, talking to residents. We have sporting equipment in all of our police cars. We put a basketball or football in all the police cars, and we encourage our officers when they see kids on the side, stop and throw the ball around a little bit. And so it gives us, now that we don't have to chase these calls all the time, it gives us more time to be able to do those kinds of functions.
Further follow-up, Councilmember Hayner, did you have something?
No, thank you. Ms. Griswold's question was effectively the same as mine.
Fair enough. Moving on to next question. This is a question with respect to innovation. Creative people seem to offer new insights frequently. Please give us an example of a time when one of your insights or innovations was particularly well received by others.
Probably the most innovative thing we did was, well, first of all, I got to tell you, I've been doing this for a long time. I've been in law enforcement for over 34 years, but I do believe that I'm still progressive. I don't believe in the pat answer of, well, we've always done it that way, so why are we changing? I am a firm believer in constant evaluation of our service delivery model and the way we provide that service. And so we are always tweaking things, but probably one of the best things we did was called the Meaningful Contacts Program. And so anybody who's familiar with law enforcement will tell you that officers, probably from about 10 years on, become kind of cynical people. They deal with a portion of society that most people don't want to deal with. And they become very ingrained. That's why you see a lot of them withdraw from the community. I saw in one of the reports that, I think it was in the survey results, where some people in the community feel as though the police just drive by, they don't roll the windows down anymore, they look straight ahead, they don't even look at anybody, they don't talk to anybody, and then the community gets this perception that we don't care and all those kinds of things. And so there's that wall there. And a lot of it comes because they've been dealing with this portion of society that is an extremely small portion of society. And so the Meaningful Contacts Program, what we asked our guys to do is a couple of times a week, get out of the car, go over to a store or stop a guy who's working in his yard and just strike up a conversation. We don't want you taking notes because we don't want them to think that you're interrogating them or something, but we just want you to talk to them and get to know them. And you could probably Google Meaningful Contacts Prescott Valley, and you'll see a slew of newspaper articles of things that have actually made it in the newspaper. Our very first one that I got notified on was just like a day or so after we started the program, and it was a homeless guy. And he was homeless by choice. He had means, but he decided that he wanted to live out in the mountains. He would come into town from time to time to get some supplies, and then he'd go back out to the mountains. Well, you can imagine his interaction with the public in general, and police specifically, was not very positive. And so the officer approached him and introduced himself, and the guy at first was very, very resistant. But the officer persisted, and they ended up having just a really wonderful conversation. And at the end of it, the homeless gentleman said that he really appreciated the fact that the officer had introduced himself by his first name, not Officer Smith or whatever, but he had introduced himself by his first name. And again, we have many, many examples of that kind of action. Some of it gets in the news. We try to publish it as much as we can. Some does, some doesn't, but that's probably been the most impactful program we've had.
Thank you. Any follow-up? Councilor Lum.
Thank you. Your description sort of fits with what we have come to understand as how our officers are, so we have 124 sworn officers, as you know. You've done a lot of homework, and it's appreciated. And, but that, given the staffing levels,
Excuse me.
that, and you've also note that in your one-year plan, you've acknowledged that police department employees and members of the public have indicated they want to see an increase in staffing. So the type of behavior you just described, we've been described as a reactive, not a proactive police department, and you've, I know, thoroughly read the Hillard-Hines report and community emphasis on more community engagement and community types of policing is the other major recommendation outside creating this oversight commission. So do you have some recommendations just initially? I know you have this very detailed plan, and appreciate that, on how we can become more proactive, less reactive.
Absolutely. Through 34 years, everybody wants more personnel. Anytime you want to give me more cops, that's great. I love more cops. But that's not the answer. We can't just throw personnel and expect it to solve problems. So I will tell you this, if I get the job and I come here, I will be conducting an evaluation of the department. I will be looking, using obviously the Hillard-Hines report as a blueprint. And, but I'll be looking at two things. Efficiencies, where can we make sure that our sworn officers are in positions that require sworn officers? In Prescott Valley, we do not have any sworn officers in positions that can be done by civilians. So, for example, we have community service officers. We have 4.5 of them. They do all of our background investigations. They do walk-in reports in the lobby. They do media relations, and they do all of our scheduling for our community outreach programs. They schedule a coffee with a cop, all of our town halls, you name it. They do all the scheduling, and then the police officers show up and take the credit, so it's a great thing, it works out really well. And so I will be looking in the police department to make sure that sworn officers are where they're supposed to be first and foremost. And I think once we go through that, I will make this guarantee to you, this commitment, that I will not come before you to ask for more staffing unless it's absolutely necessary. And if I do, I will justify it.
Councilmember Ackerman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Nationally and locally, the societal effects of mental health and substance abuse are being felt more than ever. Can you talk a little bit about your experience and how that might help you innovate around those issues, either in training or interagency collaboration?
Absolutely. So I don't know if you've seen any of my references, but one of them was the director of the West Yavapai Guidance Clinic, he's the director of the mental health unit there. We have several of our officers trained in CIT, which is Crisis Intervention Team, focused around mental health issues. And so we attend training and give training towards mental health all the time. I want to partner with, in fact, I met somebody at one of the interview panels yesterday who is a member of a local mental health coalition, and so those are the kinds of people I want to partner with. But it comes down to training, really, and so less than 3% of citizen police interaction results in a use of force. So that means more than 97% of the time we're dealing with people and there's not going to be a use of force. Yet in training, we spend an inordinate amount of time on firearms, defensive tactics, and beating people up. And so we need to spend more time on the soft skills and the training aspect of how we de-escalate things, especially when it comes to mental health. So we just bought a new program. We haven't even launched it yet. In fact, I think it went to council last night for approval. But it's a laptop-based program, and you can project it up on a screen. And the laptop is loaded with hundreds of different scenarios that deal with, for example, a homeless Hispanic woman. And the officer is interacting with this person. And depending on how the officer interacts, the trainer can branch this video in different directions. It can make her become more hostile or aggressive, or de-escalate, depending on how he's handling it. And the thing I really like about this platform is if you get stuck and the officer goes, I don't know what to say, I don't know what to do, the trainer can stop it, and they can go to a training module where they can offer a whole series of suggestions and other options in dealing with the situation. Then they go back to the training and then complete it. Those are the kinds of training platforms, and those are the kinds of trainings that we really need to start spending some time with. And you know, firearms and everything is still important. Defensive tactics are still important. We don't want our officers getting hurt. And when you do have to use a firearm, obviously it's a high liability situation, so we do want people to know how to do it, but I don't think we need to spend as much time as we do.
Follow-ons? All right, next question, please. So this gets also to change management. So describe a time, please, when you were met with strong resistance to a change you implemented. How did you overcome that resistance?
So I would use the recruiting and hiring process. There was significant pushback on that initially, and everybody thought we were lowering our standards, when in the end, we've absolutely improved our standards and increased them. So what I did was, same as I said before, I sat my command staff down and I just asked some questions. They came up with the answers, not me. And then they became my best ambassadors. And we went to the briefings, we talked to as many people as we possibly could. I wanted to hear the dissenting opinions. I wanted to hear what they had to say, because it would give me an opportunity to explain the other side of it. And so it didn't take long. I'll say that was a pretty quick turnaround. And there were some that were still skeptical of its success. But I can tell you, we just now ran through another process. We're putting 6 people in the academy in July. So normally to get 6 candidates to go through the academy, you'd have to do, I don't know, 15, 20 backgrounds, because you're going to get failures. Traditionally, you're going to get failures through that process. So we did it. We pulled the first 15, did the backgrounds on all 15, and all 15 passed. So I think that's a testament to the success of the changes that we made there.
Any follow-ons? Oh, sorry, thank you. Councilmember
Thank you. How did you recruit those 15? Where were they coming from?
So-
We're interested in increasing diversity in our department. What are some steps that you've taken?
So I plan on working with different entities to try to get it. So I was telling this story to somebody, I know, it was somebody from HR I was talking to yesterday, and I asked about SEMCOG, and I know they're involved in regional transportation issues and things like that, same as Northern Arizona Council of Governments, or NACOG. But I was at a Chamber of Commerce breakfast one morning, and they were talking about trying to attract businesses and so forth, and the presenter said something about, trying to find a reliable workforce. And a young lady sitting next to me said, well, I can tell you there's 92,000 people that want to move to Prescott Valley. And I said, does any of them want to be a cop? And she said, yeah, absolutely, actually they do. They have some national database. They can tell somehow where people want to go in the country and what the profession is that they're looking for. So we have now partnered with them in trying to do some of our national recruiting. In fact, a lot of the lateral transfers we get are from out of state. They're coming from other states to work there. And so we also do another national advertisement, governmentjobs.com. We do local, obviously, advertising. Problem with advertising like that kind of stuff is it's expensive, it's costly. So these other avenues have proven more successful. I plan on working with the NAACP here in town and help and hopefully get some recruiting through that as well.
Councilmember Hayner.
Thank you. You related a story about internal change that you made, or resistance that you may have had to internal change. I know a little bit about Northern Arizona, but I've never been to Prescott Valley, but I know Tempe and Flagstaff and communities like that is similar. So our communities are different, but could you relay maybe a story of an instance where a change that was implemented internally on the force met with community resistance? Not internal, but external resistance. And do you have any situations like that you could maybe share?
Yeah, probably, and it's certainly not widespread by any stretch of the imagination, but probably my stance on immigration. When I made that public and I made a press conference or press release, and I got interviewed on it, and my position on immigration was, I don't care what your immigration status is or your documentation status is. As long as you're not committing some other crime, I don't care. And I tried to reason through it. And I would go to town halls, and you know, somebody would invariably want to argue this point with me. And when I would say, you know, if they're not committing some other crime, I don't care, they'd always say, well, you know, immigration, undocumented aliens, that is a crime. And, you know, we'd get into this debate, and it would carry on for a few minutes. And I would finally say, sir, I'm not going to change my mind, and I can tell you're not going to change yours, so we'll just have to leave it at that. I had people write me hate mail. But, you know, I've learned two things in my career. Number one, no matter what I do, I'm never going to make everybody happy. And number two, knowing number one, I'm going to do what I think is the right thing. And I can sleep at night, and so I felt that I did the right thing, and the department supported me, the town supported me, administration as well as council, so I felt pretty confident that I'd done the right thing.
Thank you.
Councilor Lum. Follow-ons? Councilor Romlowy.
I guess this kind of came to me just recently. And being in a position of leadership, sometimes we tend to make the wrong mistake, or the wrong choice and make a mistake. Have you done that, and have you been willing to back off a decision or change your mind on a decision? Is there something that in your career that, you know, again, you're not going to make everybody happy, and so you go forward with something and you realize, well, it probably wasn't the best decision, and go back and you know, reverse your decision. Has there been a case where you've done that?
I've made a lot of bad decisions in my life. Probably leaving a gun in a restroom was probably the worst one. I wish I could go back and change that, but I can't. That wasn't a conscious decision. I'll make that perfectly clear. You know, probably one of the biggest mistakes I ever made was I appointed a lieutenant in charge of one of my sections when I was a deputy chief in investigations. And this individual turned out to be extremely destructive. I couldn't understand why all my people were transferring out of the section, including really, really good sergeants who, I mean, all of them were good people, but they kept on transferring. I couldn't understand why. And when I would sit down and talk to them, even try to be candid with them, they wouldn't tell me anything. And so finally, one of the sergeants who left about several months after he had gone, we were sitting down, and he said that this lieutenant was so difficult and so destructive to work for that nobody could stand it, and they all left. And I said, well, you know, why didn't somebody tell me? And he said, well, the lieutenant said it was coming from you. And I thought, oh. So he was reassigned so I could get him, so I could get my section back together, because the section he was affecting was training and background investigations. So I didn't go back on that decision. I mean, I guess I went back on the decision because I wanted to get rid of him, but that's the biggest mistake I ever made.
For the follow-up? All right, we got our last formal question. So this is with respect to, you know, council and chain of command relations. So if you would, please tell us about your relationship with your current governing body or chain of command. How do you encourage good communication?
Well, first of all, I'm not politically motivated or anything, but I am politically knowledgeable, if you will. I want the council to be able to be comfortable asking me a question, because if you don't understand what we're doing, then you're never going to support what we're doing. So I encourage you to ask me questions. If you decide that you want to try to give me direction, I'll probably take that to Mr. Lazarus and let him know about it. But other than that, everybody needs to have an understanding of what we're doing. I had the same philosophy. Every new employee I hire, I sit down with them and we talk about, we find out about their background, what their hopes and fears are, and all those kinds of things. And one of the things I tell them is the culture in this police department is one that if you don't understand something, or you don't agree with something, or you have an idea of something that might be able to be done differently, I want you to say something. Bring it up. Ask somebody. And if you're ever told, just sit back, and that's the way we've always done it. You take that up your chain of command, even if it has to come to my office. That's not the culture we want. I don't want it in my police department, we don't want it in our communities, and I don't want it from the council. So if you have questions and don't understand something, I want you to ask me.
Any follow-ons from that? Councilmember Grant.
Thank you, and thank you for being here. What about so that's coming towards you, what about communications to council members? How has that worked for you in the past? What are some of your best practices?
I generally don't communicate directly to the council. I will be communicating with Mr. Lazarus on a frequent basis, unless there's something that's required, some reports or whatever that are required to go to council. Anything that we may be proposing would go through the city manager's office. And so I don't know if that answers your question, but okay.
Councilor Long.
Just a quick follow-on to that. Whenever there are, it's a type of communication, it's more granular communication having to do with accidents and maybe a home investigation or, I don't know, a holdup at a place of business. In those kinds of instances where we might be hearing from residents and others concerned in the community who are aware of these incidents, would you feel it would be appropriate and helpful to directly communicate with council on those matters, or do you think that sort of more contemporaneous communication would need to go through a chain of command, including the administrator before
Well,
providing,
there's a
the elected officials, that kind of information?
Yeah, there's a couple parts
Excuse me.
to that. First and foremost, my commitment to not only you, but to the entire community is to be as transparent as possible. I think people understand and see it as being very disingenuous when we want to talk about all the great things that we're doing, and the minute something happens that's a little controversial, we say, no comment, I don't want to talk about it. So my commitment is to be transparent in as much as I possibly can. I will share information as much as I can within legal boundaries. Now, there are some things like juveniles' names and pictures and things like that that you can't disseminate and share. But anything that I can legally share without impacting any kind of an investigation or anything else, I will share you. I think the only time it would be a direct approach from me to a council member would be, again, with Mr. Lazarus' permission, but it would be to, let's say we had something that occurred in one of your wards, and we were getting resistance from a member or a segment of the community to provide information or things like that. I hope to circumvent that at the very beginning by doing some other things that I'll do. But I may approach a council member and say, hey, can you help me in your ward with this incident and make an introduction for me, sit down with me with them, and so we can try to get maybe some understanding and trust built up that way. That would be about the only thing that I would say that I would actually take directly to the council. But again, that would be through the city manager.
Mr. Mayor?
Councilor Reed.
Thank you. So I want to back up on this very question.
Sure.
Because I want to put it in context. The departing chief has on occasion directly communicated with council about things like a suspected active shooter event or a significant vehicle accident or something like that, where it's not like you're doing anything more than giving information to us. Would you feel comfortable communicating directly with us so that we were appraised of a developing problem contemporaneously?
I don't necessarily have a problem sharing those kinds of things, so avoid Main Street or Washington or Huron out here. You should avoid it anyhow because there's a lot of construction out there. It's kind of crazy. But aside from that, we have different notification type things. So Nixle, Code Red is another one. I don't know if they have that here in Michigan. So there's notification type things we can do. I have Twitter. Hey, got into the 21st century. So information on accidents are things we'd be sharing with anybody. Now, when you say an active shooter, I'm probably going to be too busy if we have an active shooter somewhere. So my one notification would be to Mr. Lazarus, who would probably have his own dissemination chain or his protocols for disseminating information. So I would still probably go through him.
Thank you.
Further follow-up? Excellent. Well, we're getting close to the end, I guess. It's, again, well, on behalf of all of us, thank you so much for coming on back to Michigan and coming and expressing an interest in Arbor. Is there anything in closing that you'd like to say?
I just have a couple questions, if you
Sure,
don't mind.
bring it on.
So, first of all, I'd like to know if all of you would be willing, are going to be willing to work with me to go into your wards, to make those introductions. I want to hold town halls to listen to your constituents and find out what they feel is going on or what their concerns or fears are. And I want to hear from all of them, and I'm hoping that all of you will work with me.
I think I can say generally yes.
Okay, good. Good.
I would suggest that was an enthusiastic.
I have coffee hours twice a month. You can visit one of my coffee hours.
Absolutely. We will be doing Coffee with a Cop every month. There's a national Coffee with a Cop Day. I think it started in California. And so a lot of departments, it's kind of like National Night Out, they do it once a year. I'm sorry, I don't see the effectiveness of that. And we've actually developed a following. We have people who follow us around to our Coffee with a Cop, kind of interesting. The other question is, and I don't know if we can get all of you in, but what are some of the challenges that you see that I haven't seen?
I'll answer that.
Councilor Reed?
So our county isn't immune from the opioid crisis, although within the city, we don't talk about it much. And so I would really hope that you would come in and inform council as to, the degree that is impacting the work of your officers if you come. And so I'd like to hear what you have to say about that.
So it is a problem, and that's probably one of the biggest problems we face in Prescott Valley. So, there's two sides of it. One side's not very effective, but I'm not sure how effective the other side is. The first side is investigations and enforcement. We've been trying to wrest our way out of problems for 100 years, and it still hasn't worked. If you look back in the mid to late 90s, pharmaceutical companies started to prescribe oxycodone and those kinds of opiates at a greater rate. And they said to the medical community, it's not addictive. And the medical community bought into that, and they started to prescribe it at much higher rates. That's kind of what's led to the problem today, because when people get off either the opioids or other pain medications, their only option oftentimes is to turn to heroin. And so it's compounding that problem. We will continue to investigate and arrest those that are violating that law and hopefully get to the ones that are supplying it, not just the victim user, if you will. And so we'll continue to do that, but that's not going to solve the problem. The other side of it is education. And we take great lengths to try to educate the community. We had a tragic incident not even a year ago where two 19-year-old young men both overdosed, and it was on fentanyl-laced pills. And so we held an opioid town hall immediately following that, and we packed the council chambers, probably 300 people or more, and it was standing room only. Because people care. They're interested in this, and they do care about it. We just need to get the word out. We need to educate the community. We need to talk to parents of school kids and say, these are the things you need to look for. You can't close your eyes to the problem. You do need to pay attention to this. So that's the other side of it. I'm not sure if either one of them is ever going to fix the problem, but we have to keep trying. Somebody asked me one time, what's an acceptable level of crime for you? And I said, 0. There is no acceptable level of crime. We have to always continue going forward and try to fix the problem. Will we ever eliminate all crime? Probably not, but we can't quit trying.
We'll roll with Councilmember Ackerman and then call it a day to make sure that our time doesn't so far exceed the others.
Thank you again. We are a college town. Can you share some experience you've had or at least relate experiences you've had to dealing with college campus, faculty, staff, students, as well as dealing with large sports events?
So I don't have a lot of university-type experience. I dealt with middle school and elementary school teachers, kids and so forth. I've raised 3 kids, so I all went to college, so I know college kids that way. The other night at the meet and greet, there was a student reporter from U of M there, and she said, why should the students here care who their police chief is? And I said, well, first of all, your population, student population at the university is about 40,000, give or take, and you have on-campus housing for about 25% of that. So that means 75% is either commuting, which I believe would be a small fraction, or they're living in Ann Arbor, and they're my citizens. The second thing is, on average, they're going to be there for 4 or 5 years, some longer if they go to graduate school, whatever. But I think that there's a segment of that population that's going to stay here forever. They're going to get a job here, they're going to raise a family here, they're going to get a job in the research sector or whatever it is. And so the kids that are there today, and I can call them kids because I'm old enough, they are our future citizens of this community. And so it's really incumbent upon us to have a good relationship with them and continue that relationship, and I'm committed to that.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I very much appreciate it.
Thank you.
We'll have opening for public comment, then we'll adjourn.
Okay.
And so the public comment being a feature of this as a meeting.
Okay.
Thank you. So now we come to public comment general time. Public comment general time is an opportunity for members of the public to speak to council and the community about matters of municipal interest. To speak at public comment general time, one need not have signed up in advance. Speakers will have 3 minutes in which to speak, so please pay close attention to the time clock. As a matter of courtesy, we may have only one person speaking at a time. And finally, if you require assistance in speaking before council, we'd be delighted to provide it to you. Is there anyone who'd like to speak at public comment? Please just come on up.
Hi. I'm concerned, you know, you hear the words precision policing and community policing, and those have many different definitions for many different people. When you're evaluating these candidates, I'm just sort of interested in, you know, what those mean to the council, what those mean to you. And also, I would encourage the council to think about, you know, what police interactions need to happen, what don't need to happen, and you know, thinking about how resources are getting used. And I think that, I don't know, I guess, sorry, I didn't prepare something, but yeah, I think it's important to think about these philosophies in concrete terms and to think about ways in which we can limit harmful interactions, because, like, you know, these terms all mean the same thing in a lot of ways and blur together, and it's hard to piece out which is actually like a reform and what's actually just like the same thing that police have always done, and, you know, just a way to rebrand calls for more resources and more harmful interactions for people. But thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak at public comment? Seeing no one, public comment is closed. We have a motion to adjourn, please. Moved by Councilmember Lum, seconded by Councilmember Hayner. Discussion. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? We're adjourned.